I am 82 years old now, and my hands tremble when I hold a cup of tea. The doctor says it is just age, nothing to fear. But I know better. Some trembling does not come from age. Some trembling comes from memory. There are days when I sit by my window, watching the street that used to be louder, fuller, warmer. Back then, children played outside until the sky turned orange, and neighbors spoke to each other like family. Now the street is quieter, and the people walk faster, eyes fixed on their phones or their worries. But there is one day, one afternoon, that lives inside me like a shadow that refuses to fade. It was summer. I remember because the air felt heavy, and the heat pressed against the walls like it wanted to come inside. I was 65 then, not yet old enough to feel fragile, but old enough to notice the way the world had changed. That morning began like any other. I woke early, before the sun had fully stretched itself across the sky. I made coffee the way my mother taught me, slow, patient, letting the smell fill the kitchen before taking the first sip. I lived alone even then. My husband had passed years before, and my children lived in other states, busy with lives of their own. After breakfast, I watered the small plants on my porch. They were not beautiful plants, not the kind that would win prizes, but they were alive, and caring for them gave me a sense of purpose. Around noon, I decided to walk to the small corner store down the street. It had been there longer than I had lived in the neighborhood. A simple place, faded sign, old glass windows, and a bell that rang every time someone opened the door. That store was run by Mr. Halvorsen, a quiet man with gray hair and thick glasses. He was not unfriendly, but he was not warm either. He spoke little, nodded often, and watched everything. I remember stepping outside and feeling the sun wrap around my shoulders like a heavy blanket. That was when I first saw him. The boy. He stood across the street, thin and tall for his age, maybe 13 years old. His skin was deep brown, shining slightly under the sunlight. He wore a worn-out t-shirt, too big for his small frame, and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. But what I noticed most was his face. Not fear. Not anger. Hope. He looked at the store the way a hungry person looks at food, not just with hunger in the stomach, but hunger in the soul. I slowed my steps without realizing it. He hesitated at the door, placing his hand on the handle, then pulling it back, then reaching again, like he was gathering courage from somewhere deep inside. Finally, he opened the door. The bell rang. I followed a few seconds later. Inside, the store smelled like bread, dust, and old wood. The fans above turned slowly, pushing warm air around without much success. The boy stood near the counter, staring at the shelves. Not touching anything. Just looking. I pretended to study the canned goods, but I watched him from the corner of my eye. He swallowed hard. "Sir," he said softly. His voice was gentle, respectful. Mr. Halvorsen looked up from behind the counter. "Yes." The boy stepped closer. "Do you have anything cheap? Something to eat?" There was no arrogance in his voice. No demand. Just need. Mr. Halvorsen studied him carefully, his lips pressing into a thin line. "What do you have?" he asked. The boy opened his hand. 3 coins. Just 3. I felt something tighten inside my chest. Mr. Halvorsen sighed and reached under the counter. He pulled out a small wrapped pastry, the kind that usually sat unsold at the end of the day. "This," he said, placing it on the counter. "That will cover it." The boy's eyes lit up. Not just happy, grateful. "Thank you, sir," he said quickly. He took the pastry as if it were treasure. Something rare. Something precious. I watched his hands, thin fingers holding that food like it might disappear if he gripped too loosely. I paid for my bread and milk, but my attention stayed on him. He turned toward the door. And then it happened. He smiled. Not a small smile. A wide one, bright enough to change the room. And he ran. Not away. Not hiding. He ran because he was happy. Because he finally had food. Because sometimes joy is too big to walk. The bell above the door rang loudly as he pushed outside. But before I could even step toward the exit, I heard shouting. Stop. A chair scraped loudly. Another voice joined. He took something. My heart dropped into my stomach. I rushed to the door. Outside, the street that had been quiet moments before was suddenly loud with confusion. 3 men stood near the sidewalk. Men I recognized from the neighborhood. Men who gathered outside in the afternoons, talking loudly and laughing too harshly. One of them pointed down the street. There he goes. I saw the boy. Still running. Still holding that pastry. Still smiling. Though now it began to fade as he noticed the shouting behind him. He stole. Another man yelled. I opened my mouth. No, I tried to say. But my voice felt trapped inside my throat. The men ran after him. Heavy steps pounding against the pavement. The boy slowed, confused, turning his head back. I paid, he shouted. But panic had already taken control of the crowd forming behind him. More voices joined. More footsteps. Fear spreads faster than truth. I stepped off the curb, my heart beating harder than it had in years. I saw him pay. I shouted. But no one listened. The boy stopped running, maybe thinking stopping would prove his innocence. That was his mistake. One of the men reached him first. He grabbed the boy's arm roughly. What did you take? He barked. I didn't steal, the boy cried. His voice cracked with terror now. Another man shoved him. Hard. The pastry fell from his hand onto the hot pavement. I felt something break inside me at that moment. Not just anger. Not just fear. Shame. Because I stood there, frozen, while a child who only wanted food was surrounded by grown men who saw danger where there was none. I forced my legs forward. I saw him pay. I yelled again. Louder this time. But chaos has its own momentum. The boy tried to explain. I gave him coins, I paid. Another shove. This time he fell. His small body hitting the ground with a sound I still hear in my dreams. And in that moment, I knew something terrible had begun. Something that would change not just his life, but mine too. Because some days pass quietly into memory. And some days refuse to let you rest. That afternoon was the day I learned how quickly joy can be mistaken for guilt. And how dangerous a smile can become in the wrong eyes. I do not remember crossing the street. One moment I was standing near the store door, my hands shaking. My breath caught somewhere between fear and anger. The next moment, I was pushing through the small crowd that had formed around the boy. People had gathered quickly, faster than kindness ever gathers. Faces I recognized. Neighbors I had waved to for years. People who had borrowed sugar from me, who had smiled politely in passing. But now their faces were different. Hard. Suspicious. Hungry for something I could not name. Stop this. I shouted, forcing my way between two men. Leave him alone. The boy was on the ground. His knees scraped against the pavement. One of the men held his arm too tightly, fingers digging into his skin. The boy's eyes were wide, filled with terror, the kind of fear that belongs in nightmares, not on a summer afternoon. I paid, he whispered again, his voice shaking. I gave him the coins. His gaze moved frantically between the faces surrounding him, searching for someone who would believe him, for someone who would save him. That was when his eyes met mine. And I saw something that has stayed with me every day since. Hope. Not strong hope. Not confident hope. Fragile hope. The kind that breaks easily. I saw him pay. I said louder this time, stepping in front of the man holding him. He bought that pastry. I was inside the store. One of the men, tall, with a red face and thick arms, looked at me with irritation. You sure about that? He asked sharply. Yes, I answered without hesitation. I watched him. He had coins. He paid for it. A murmur passed through the crowd. Uncertainty began to creep into their expressions. But doubt is stubborn, especially when it grows from prejudice. Then why did he run? Another man asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Why did he run? Such a simple question. Such a dangerous one. Because he was happy, I replied. Because he had food. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Others did not move at all. The boy slowly tried to sit up, wincing as he did. His hand trembled as he reached toward the fallen pastry lying on the pavement. It had landed in dust and dirt. Flattened. Ruined. He stared at it like someone watching something precious disappear forever. That look broke me more than anything else. Not the shouting. Not the pushing. That look. The red-faced man loosened his grip slightly but did not let go. We should check with Halvorsen, he muttered. Yes, I said quickly. Let's do that. We walked, or rather, dragged the boy, back toward the store. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside, the store was suddenly quiet again. The bell rang as the door opened, sounding too cheerful for what had just happened. Mr. Halvorsen stood behind the counter, confusion written across his face. "What is all this noise?" he asked. The red-faced man spoke first. "This boy," he said, shoving the child forward slightly. "Did he pay for that pastry?" The store felt smaller than before. Hotter. Tighter. Everyone watched. Waiting. Mr. Halvorsen looked at the boy, then at the pastry still in the boy's trembling hand, then at me. And for a moment, just one moment, I saw hesitation in his eyes. That hesitation terrified me, because truth should never hesitate. "Yes," I said firmly, stepping forward again. "He paid. I saw him give you coins." Mr. Halvorsen adjusted his glasses. Silence stretched across the room like a rope pulled too tight. Finally he nodded. "Yes," he said. "He paid." The words fell into the room like rain after a drought. But relief did not come. Not fully. Because damage had already been done. The red-faced man released the boy's arm. A few others looked away, suddenly very interested in the shelves, the floor, anything but the frightened child before them. "No harm meant," one of them muttered. "No harm meant." Those words burned inside my chest. The boy did not speak. He simply stood there, shoulders shaking, trying to stay strong, trying not to cry in front of strangers who had just treated him like a criminal. I stepped closer to him. "Are you hurt?" I asked gently. He shook his head, but tears rolled down his cheeks anyway. "I just wanted something to eat," he whispered. That sentence, that simple sentence, it echoed louder in my mind than any shout that day. I reached into my purse and pulled out a handkerchief. The same one I carried every day, soft cotton, worn thin from years of use. "Here," I said softly. He took it with shaking hands. "Thank you," he murmured. The crowd slowly began to disperse, embarrassment hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. But embarrassment is not the same as remorse. And silence is not the same as apology. Mr. Halvorsen cleared his throat. "I have another pastry," he said awkwardly, pulling a fresh one from beneath the counter. He placed it gently in front of the boy. "For you." The boy hesitated. Not out of pride. Out of fear. As if kindness itself had become suspicious. "It's okay," I whispered. "Take it." Slowly he reached out and accepted it. This time he did not smile. Not the bright smile from earlier. Not the joyful one that had sent him running into the sunlight. That smile was gone. And I knew, even then, that some smiles never come back once they are taken. "What's your name?" I asked him. He looked at me, still cautious. "Daniel," he said quietly. "Daniel." I repeated the name in my mind, holding on to it like something important. "I'm Margaret," I told him. He nodded slightly. Outside, the sun still shone. The world looked unchanged. Cars passed. Birds chirped. Life continued as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something had shifted. Something permanent. Something heavy. Daniel slowly turned toward the door. "Wait," I said. He paused. "Do you live nearby?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "2 streets down," he said softly. "Are you alone?" Another pause. Then a quiet nod. I felt a knot form deep inside my chest. A 13-year-old child. Alone. Hungry. Afraid. And nearly hurt by grown men who should have known better. "I'll walk with you," I said. He looked surprised. "You don't have to," he replied. "I want to," I said firmly. And that was the moment, though I did not know it yet, when Daniel's story became part of mine. When responsibility replaced distance. When witnessing became involvement. We stepped outside together. The street felt different now. He walked slowly beside me, holding the pastry carefully in both hands, as if protecting it from the world. After a few steps he spoke again. Very quietly. "Why did they think I stole?" The question struck deeper than any blow. I searched for an answer. A true answer. But truth can be painful, especially when spoken to a child. "I don't know," I said at first. But that was not honest. So I stopped walking. I turned to face him. And I said the words that tasted bitter in my mouth. Sometimes, I said slowly, people are afraid of things they don't understand. He looked down at his hands, at his skin, and though he did not speak, I knew he understood more than I wished he had to. We continued walking. Silence stretched between us. But it was not empty silence. It was heavy, full of thoughts too big for words. And deep inside, I felt something growing. Not just sadness. Not just anger. Determination. Because what happened that day should never have happened. And yet it did. And I knew as clearly as I knew my own name that this would not be the end of the story. Not for Daniel. Not for me. And not for the people who stood there and watched. We walked slowly down the street that afternoon. Daniel and I side by side. The silence between us heavy but not empty. He held the pastry like it was something sacred. Every few steps, he looked down at it, as if making sure it was still there, still his. I noticed the way he stayed close to the edge of the sidewalk, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed us. Fear changes how a child walks. Fear makes small shoulders carry heavy things. After a few minutes, he spoke again. My grandma says I shouldn't run in public places, he murmured, almost to himself. I turned to him gently. Where is your grandma? I asked. He pointed ahead. She stays home. She can't walk much anymore. There was something in the way he said it, careful, protective, that told me he loved her deeply. We turned onto a smaller street, quieter than the main one. The houses were older here, some with peeling paint, some with broken fences. But there were flowers in front of a few homes, stubborn little bursts of color against worn wood and cracked steps. Daniel stopped in front of a small house with faded blue walls. This is it, he said softly. The front porch sagged slightly, and the screen door hung a little crooked on its hinges. But it was clean. Someone cared about that place. Do you want me to walk you inside? I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. We climbed the steps together. Daniel pushed open the door slowly. Grandma, he called. His voice echoed into the small house. A moment later, an older voice answered. Daniel? Is that you? We stepped inside. The living room smelled faintly of medicine and cooking oil. Curtains blocked most of the sunlight, leaving the room dim but warm. An elderly woman sat in a chair near the window. Her hair was silver, her hands resting on her lap. She looked tired, but alert, the kind of alertness that comes from years of watching over loved ones. When she saw Daniel, her expression softened with relief. There you are, she said. You were gone longer than usual. Then she noticed me. Her eyes sharpened. And who is this? Daniel looked down, unsure how to explain. Before he could speak, I stepped forward. My name is Margaret, I said gently. I walked him home. The grandmother studied my face carefully, reading something beneath my words. What happened? She asked. Daniel's hands tightened around the pastry. I just went to the store, he whispered. The grandmother's gaze moved between us. She knew. Without needing details, she knew. Some elders carry wisdom like armor. Tell me, she said quietly. So I did. I told her everything. The store. The shouting. The accusations. The men. The fall. Every detail. Daniel stayed silent, staring at the floor while I spoke. By the time I finished, the room felt heavier than before. The grandmother closed her eyes for a moment. Not in surprise. Not in disbelief. In exhaustion. Thank you for bringing him home, she said finally. Her voice carried both gratitude and sorrow. I tried to tell him to be careful, she continued softly. But hunger doesn't wait for caution. Those words stayed with me. Hunger doesn't wait for caution. Daniel stepped forward and handed her the pastry. For you, he said. She shook her head. No, baby. You eat. He hesitated, then slowly opened the wrapper. He took one small bite, then another, carefully, slowly, like someone who knew food was never guaranteed. I felt tears pressing behind my eyes. Not loud tears, quiet ones. The kind that form when your heart sees something it cannot fix. That afternoon should have ended there. But life rarely ends stories where we expect. I visited Daniel and his grandmother again the next day, and the day after that. At first, I told myself it was just to check on him, to make sure he was safe. But deep down, I knew something else had begun. Responsibility, connection, friendship. Daniel's grandmother, her name was Mrs. Evelyn, welcomed me each time with quiet gratitude. Over time, I learned their story. Daniel's parents had passed years before. An accident that left his grandmother as his only family. She had worked most of her life cleaning houses, but age and illness had slowed her down. Money was always tight. Food was sometimes scarce. Daniel often walked to the store with just a few coins, hoping it would be enough. Hope had been his daily currency, and suspicion had nearly stolen his safety. A week after the incident, I returned to the store. Not for bread. Not for milk. For truth. Mr. Halvorsen stood behind the counter, quieter than usual. I walked straight toward him. "You saw what happened," I said. He nodded slowly. "I did." "And you waited," I continued. His eyes lowered. "I was afraid," he admitted. Afraid. A grown man. Afraid to speak. While a child was accused. That was the moment I realized something important. Silence can hurt just as much as violence. From that day forward, I began speaking more loudly. At community meetings. At neighborhood gatherings. Anywhere people would listen. I told Daniel's story. Not to shame, but to awaken. Some listened. Some turned away. But change, even small change, begins with discomfort. Time moved the way it always does, quietly, relentlessly. Daniel grew taller, stronger, wiser. But he never forgot that day. Neither did I. Every birthday, I baked him a cake. Every school year, I helped him with supplies. Every winter, I brought warm coats. Not charity. Family. Because somewhere along the way, that was what we became. Family without blood. Family without obligation. Family by choice. Daniel studied hard. Harder than most children his age. "I want to be someone," he once told me. "You already are," I replied. But he shook his head. "I want to help kids who get blamed for things they didn't do." That was when I saw it. Purpose. Born from pain. I was 79 when Daniel came to see me one spring morning. By then, walking had become difficult for me. My hands shook more, and my memory sometimes wandered. But I never forgot his face. Never forgot that smile. The one that disappeared. And slowly returned over the years. He knocked on my door that morning. When I opened it, I nearly didn't recognize him. Not because he had changed, but because he had grown into the man he was meant to be. Tall. Confident. Kind eyes. Still the same boy beneath it all. "Miss Margaret," he said, smiling. And there it was. That smile. Not broken. Not afraid. Whole. "I'm graduating today," he said. Graduating. I repeated. He nodded proudly. "Law school." Law school. The words echoed in my mind like church bells. "I want to defend people," he continued. "People who don't have a voice." Tears filled my eyes. "You already defended yourself once," I whispered. He reached into his pocket. Pulled out something small. A folded piece of cloth. My handkerchief. The same one I gave him that day. "I kept it," he said. I couldn't speak. My voice had disappeared somewhere inside my chest. "You saved me," he added quietly. "No," I said finally. "You saved yourself." But we both knew the truth. Sometimes saving someone begins with a single voice saying, "I saw what happened." Now I sit by my window. 82 years old. Hands trembling. Heart heavy with memories. But also full. Daniel visits whenever he can. He works long hours now. Defending people, standing in courtrooms, speaking truths others fear to speak. And every time he leaves he smiles. That same smile. The one that once ran down a sidewalk, full of joy over a single pastry. The one nearly taken away by suspicion. The one that returns stronger than before. Sometimes when the street outside is quiet, I close my eyes and remember that summer afternoon. The heat. The shouting. The fall. The silence. And the choice. Because life is made of moments. Small ones. Ordinary ones. Moments where we decide whether to speak. Or stay silent. If there is one thing I have learned in 82 years, it is this. A child running with joy should never be mistaken for a criminal. Hunger should never be punished. And silence. Silence can be as dangerous as hate. But courage, even from an old woman with trembling hands, can change the direction of a life. Sometimes, even save it. And every time I see Daniel walk away, briefcase in hand, head held high, I whisper the same words to myself. That smile came back. And this time, no one will take it away.